What's up, guys, and welcome to Scourge of War Waterloo, episode 31, part 1. So today we are finally going to get into the Battle of Ligny. And as I talked about in my video, how should we proceed with Ligny? We're going to be starting with the Old Fox Fights Back, which is the Prussian army scenario for the Battle of Ligny. It is 7 hours long. It is a monster scenario. In terms of the actual ground covered, I think it's the biggest battle in the entire game. Um, Waterloo has more men, and it's a longer battle, but it's also more contained. I guess it's more of a contained area. It's two lines set up basically facing each other, whereas this battle is a little more spread out. The Prussians have some units forward and some further back in reserve and kind of scattered all over the map. And the French do as well. They have a forward line, and then they have some reserves, and they have some units that come in as reinforcements. So it's a little more spread out than Waterloo is, which means there's more to watch over a wider area than there necessarily is at Waterloo. So in many ways, this is the biggest battle in the game in terms of overall area that's you're going to need to watch. Um, so yeah, it's a monster. So let's get started. First, I want to talk about how I decided to do this. So after hearing a couple of comments back from people on both the video I put out as well as some forums, uh, basically what I've decided to do is make it a four-part series. And each video will hopefully end up being about 2 hours long. Now, in the first video here, what I'm going to do is cover the overall arcing strategy of the entire battle, which is going to take me quite a while because it's a big battle. A lot happens, so there's a lot we need to go over so that you guys are going to know what's going to happen and around when it's going to happen and how to prepare for it, as well as the first hour of the scenario. Um, so this will probably be the shortest of the four videos because even with all I have to talk about, I doubt it's going to be an entire hour. So, this video, it sort of serves as an introduction to this battle as well as we're going to play the first hour of the battle, and then the final three episodes will of course be in 2 hour increments of the battle. Uh, so those videos should be just about 2 hours because I won't need to go over everything in the beginning because I'm going to do that in this episode. All right, so as I said, the length of play is 7 hours. We command the entire Prussian army. It's 2:30 p.m. on June 16th, 1815, so the beginning of the Battle of Ligny. And now this battle is not time compressed the way the scenarios for the Battle of Quatre Bras are. Quatre Bras was in many ways kind of the same length as Ligny. It started around the same time and it ended at darkness pretty much the way Ligny did too. Ligny might have been a little longer. Quatre Bras might have been about 6 hours or so. But the scenarios for Quatre Bras were time compressed, meaning instead of being a 6 hour battle, they compressed it into 3 hours and simply sped up the chain of events in terms of when forces arrive on the field and so forth to make it playable within 3 hours. And I think it worked fine that way. Um, you're still playing the entire battle. You're just kind of playing it a little sped up in terms of the chain of events. Ligny is not like that. Ligny happens in absolute real time. So the real Battle of Ligny did start around 2:30 p.m. and it ended at darkness, and this battle does as well. It goes to about 21:30, I want to say 9:30 at night when it's basically too dark to continue. So yeah, it happens in complete real time. Uh, okay, so The situation is the French army is deployed ahead of your position along the river Ligne. Yesterday, the First Corps fought a hard retreating battle, suffering painful losses, but their sacrifice has permitted us to regroup the Second and Third Corps in the area of Sombreffe, and we are ready to accept battle. The Duke of Wellington promised to reach us as soon as possible with his army, hitting the French army on his left flank, so we have to hold for the time necessary. There will not be another Jena. Now it says, P.S. One of the scenarios variants foresee the intervention of the full of Derland's Corps and the 4th Prussian Corps. Now, in all my times of playing this scenario, I have never ever seen any of these variants happen. Uh, I'm not sure if that has to do with the fact that we're playing, because we're using the Grog toolbar, we're obviously playing through the user scenarios tab, even though you don't see that anymore because they just merged it into one button called scenarios. It's just a relabeled user scenarios tab. It still shows up exactly like the user scenarios tab does. So I have never ever seen any of this happen, either from the French side or the Prussian side. I've probably played this scenario from both sides a dozen times each, and I've never ever seen any of this happen. I've never gotten the full of Derland's Corps playing as the French, and I've never gotten the 4th Corps of the Prussian army either. None of this has ever happened, so it may not ever happen. Um, it may be that the only way to actually get this to happen is to actually not use the Grog toolbar and play through the Waterloo battles tab. It may be set up that that's the only way this variant uh, ever happens, because I know it's a 1 in 6 chance of this variant supposedly being uh, able to happen is a 1 in 6 chance. Every time you boot up the game, there's a 1 in 6 chance, or boot up the scenario. It's a 1 in 6 chance that these variants will happen. So either it never happens because we're playing through the user scenarios tab, or I just have extremely bad luck and I have never actually just gotten it to happen, in, 2 dozen times total of having played the scenario from each side, which I find highly unlikely. I think in, 20 something times of playing the scenario from both the Prussian and French side, I would have seen this at least once or twice. So I don't actually think this can really happen. The French do get one division of Derland's Corps, which is Duret's division, which consists of Pigot and Brye's brigade. If you remember in Waterloo, when we played Count Derland's attack, Pigot and Brye are on the far right over by Papelotte, those two brigades. It's a relatively small division compared to the other divisions in Derland's Corps. But that happens every single time, so I can only assume that um, that division, Duret's division of Derland's Corps, is actually part of the OOB for Ligny, and they actually appear every single time because I've always seen that. But never have I seen the rest of Derland's Corps. He has 3 other divisions, and I've never ever seen them. And likewise, I've never seen the 4th Corps of the Prussian army. So I'm going to assume that is only because we're playing through the user scenarios tab, and that somehow makes this not ever happen. So yeah, don't expect that you're going to have to deal with all of Derland's Corps, and likewise don't expect that you're going to have the 4th Corps, which is, that's fine actually. That's historically the way it happened. Derland's Corps was not involved at Ligny, and the Prussian Bulow's 4th Corps, the Prussian army, was still like a day's march away from Ligny when it happened. So it's a historical stretch to even have this variant. More so for the Prussians than it is for the French. If the French had gotten their act together, it's, quite possible that Derland could have had a much bigger impact either at Quatre Bras or at Ligny. But he spent most of the day kind of marching and counter marching back and forth between Quatre Bras and Ligny, never quite knowing what it was he was supposed to do because he kept getting countermanding orders and conflicting orders from Ney at Quatre Bras and Napoleon at Ligny. So he wasn't quite sure what to do, and he just kind of kept marching back and forth. If I was on Derland's staff, I would have said, "Sir, when in doubt, listen to the Emperor." Okay, so The mission is straight ahead, hold the battlefield against the French attacks. So obviously, we're going to be playing as defensively as possible here. As I've said, it's usually easier to play defense in this game than it is to play attack. However, if I had to compare the difficulty of the Prussian army scenario for Ligny and the French uh, version of the Battle of Ligny, in terms of ease, I would actually give the edge to the French in this particular scenario. Only because in the French scenario, first of all, there's no question. The French troop quality, generally speaking, is higher than the Prussian troop quality. The French army is better. There's no question about that. But generally speaking, even though the French are on the attack, the key objectives that you need to take as the French are not heavily defended, and they're relatively easy to capture. And then it's very easy to just go on the defense and force the Prussians to try and kick you out, than it is to um, for the Prussians to try and maintain this defense all through the battle. It's a lot easier for the French to just capture these key objectives. And there's kind of a loophole in the French version where there's an objective up here that's worth an obscene amount of points, and I think it's supposed to be a waypoint objective, and it's actually a hold objective in the game. So it's possible for the French to score just an obscene number of points in their version of the scenario. Uh, and naturally, the attacker does have the advantage of getting to pick and choose where the battle is going to happen. Whereas playing as the Prussians in this scenario, we kind of have to anticipate where the French are going to attack, how they're going to attack, and whatnot, and be ready for it, as opposed to being able to pick the point of contact, as you can do as the French player. So, in general, even though defending in individual situations is usually easier, in terms of which scenario is actually more difficult, I would say the Prussian scenario is more difficult than the French version, for the various reasons I just stated. So, all right, let's talk about the strategy for how we're going to handle this battle. All right, we have basically three corps on the Prussian side. We have von Zeithan's first corps, which is kind of set up starting up here around Saint Armand La Haye, and going down through Saint Armand as well as Ligny, with some troops and artillery in reserve back behind the villages, kind of on the hill. There's kind of a hill back here, and they have their artillery and some reserves set up here. But yeah, von Zeithan's corps is basically stretched out within the towns, covering the area of Saint Armand La Haye, Saint Armand La Meaux, Saint Armand, as well as the town of Ligny. On our extreme left, we have the Third Corps under von Thielmann, um, and he's occupying kind of the area between Bogny and Montpatteau, and my French is terrible, and on the Sombreffe. Mostly, he's concentrated along this road here, around the Tangrenel area. Um, and he's basically anchoring our left flank against any threat from the French down this road here. Uh, in reserve, back on the Sombreffe, behind von Zeithan and von Thielmann, we have Perch's Second Corps, which is basically our main reserve. Some of their troops are also up here on the Namur Road, kind of securing that route, because this road here is what leads to Quatre Bras, and so it is Wellington's road network that connects his forces at Quatre Bras to our forces here at Ligny. Um, so the opening few hours of this battle are largely going to be kind of what you see in, I think it was episode 22 of my main series, which was called Saint Armand, which was the Prussian corps scenario for the defense of Saint Armand. And this battle opens up pretty much exactly like that scenario does, with a couple of important things to note. In that scenario, most of your units start out fixed, and so they're released to you at certain times during the scenario, in keeping with the historical times that those units were brought into use during the battle between Saint Armand and Saint Armand La Haye. In this scenario, that's not the case. The entire army is available to us right from the start. So it gives the Prussian army a little more flexibility in setting up our defense in that um, we don't have to be so outnumbered at the beginning like we were in the core scenario, Saint Armand, LGO1 right up here, um, because we can bring more troops in to reinforce this position at Saint Armand than we had to use at Saint Armand in the core scenario. Um, but that's not necessarily what you really want to do right away because you don't want to commit all your troops at once. The French, under Van Damme, who commands the Third Corps, are going to attack in mostly the same order that they attacked in the Saint Armand Corps scenario. Lafol's division will attack first, then they'll come forward over here, and start moving their divisions up. Uh, from largely from south to north. So it's going to appear the first couple of hours, certainly the first hour, like most of the action is exactly the same or relatively the same. It plays out kind of the same way as in the Prussian Corps scenario, Saint Armand. Um, but we have a lot to look out for than than this area because we also have Ligny and Gerard's Corps is here. Now they're not going to attack right away. As I said, it's first going to be over here, but probably either by the very end of this video or the beginning of the next video, you will start to see Gerard start to advance his troops towards Ligny. Ligny is probably the easiest town to defend out of all of these because it's bisected by a river going through the town, and so the best strategy is actually to give up the first half of the town. You don't want to stand too far forward because the French do have a lot of guns. And while I have always said that artillery at long range doesn't do a lot of damage, bear in mind that a lot of the scenarios that I was saying that in were hour long, hour and a half long, maybe at most 2 hours long. Uh, and that's a whole, being bombarded for 1 hour or 2 hours is a whole different story than being bombarded for 7 hours. Uh, if you stand here in the front half of the village over the course of 5, 6 hours and let the French guns bomb away on you, you will be surprised, sadly surprised, at how many men you will lose to that bombardment. You will get entire units destroyed if you do not move them. Um, because it's just, even though artillery isn't any more effective per shot here than it is in a 30-minute scenario, it's the sheer amount of time that the artillery has to just keep bombarding your position. And they're going to get hits. That's just the way it is over this kind of time. And they will eventually start to whittle your units down. So you do start off with a couple of units on the south side of the river inside there's a little farmhouse here, and you have some skirmishers and a couple of units. What you want to do is bring them all back behind this river and set them up kind of right against the river in line, and deploy skirmishers on the other side of the river. This way, the French can come right through and have the first part of the town. But when they come kind of through that first layer of houses, they're going to be kind of disorganized and kind of broken up by those buildings. And you're going to have a skirmish line out here to just shoot them up, as well as a big 8-gun artillery battery that's set up over here. The castle does not take a huge beating from the artillery because the artillery is mostly set up over here. And so the castle is not such a big target. So I usually do keep the castle. I do keep some units in the castle, but everybody else you want to back off to the north side of the river and set everybody up in line. And even then, some of the units that get hit by artillery, I'll back them off even further and line them down, and basically just have a skirmisher line on the south side of the river. And Ligny is probably the easiest town to hold. The real thing about Ligny um, is not giving it up or no or holding it. The real thing is knowing when to leave. When to the town of Ligny is no longer tenable, and that'll happen much later in the battle. But even though we're going to set up a defense here, we're not going to do too much to actually strengthen that defense because ultimately we will leave Ligny. We will have to withdraw. When the French come forward with their cavalry on either side of the town and start to outflank it, it is time to go. You don't want to get outflanked and cut off from the rest of your forces. So later on in the battle, the French will send a lot of their cavalry forward. Um, Some of the cavalry down here will come forward and move off to the left of Ligny. A lot of the Pajol's cavalry down here will move forward and kind of try to come in here. We'll counterattack them with our cavalry. So this area not so much, but here they kind of have the French kind of have a free road through, to the flank of the town. At that point, when you see them coming down, it's just time to leave. And um, all through the course of this battle, because I know that eventually the French army is capable of breaking us at any point along the line. Once the Sixth Corps comes up, once the Napoleon decides to commit the Imperial Guard, depending on where he commits them, and I've seen him do it. I've seen the French do it in different places. I've seen the Imperial Guard attack Ligny. I've seen the Imperial Guard attack Saint Armand. Ideally, you want them to attack Saint Armand because it's just a more bottled up area, and it's hard for the Imperial Guard, as good as they are, to actually bring sufficient forces to bear on you because you're in this little pocket behind the town and behind the church here, and it makes it hard for maybe more than one or two units to actually approach you at any given time. So ideally, if the Imperial Guard is going to get committed, and they usually do, it's best to have them committed at Saint Armand. If they get committed at Ligny, um, it really doesn't change anything because you already know you're going to give up Ligny. Saint Armand, sometimes you have to give it up, sometimes you don't. It really depends how forceful they are at the end of the battle when they can bring more forces to bear. Um, how forceful they are at trying to get you out of there. I was able to kind of hold Saint Armand. I lost the church, but I held on to the objective, mostly. We lost it, we took it, we lost it, we took it. So I didn't quite withdraw from Saint Armand, but I certainly gave up Ligny. While all of this battle is going on, uh, as I said, most of at the point where you start giving up towns and so forth, it's much later in the battle. Um, so through most of the scenario, you're actually going to be able to hold both Ligny, Saint Armand, and Saint Armand La Haye. What you're going to do is you're going to take units from Perch's Corps, right, and you're going to set up a secondary line, sort of from Brye, kind of south, and then bending around right north of Ligny, and then kind of terminating in here somewhere because you're going to end up using your cavalry to kind of be the front here. So you're going to set up kind of a line of basically fortresses and horsey forts, formations that I showed you in Quatre Bras. Well, certainly I showed you the fortress a long time ago, but the horsey fort is relatively new for you guys. And we're going to basically set up a semicircle starting around here from Brye and just kind of looping through north of Ligny and kind of ending in the air here because it doesn't need to be anchored on anything because we have so many troops in this area, as well as a lot of cavalry, that this area is not really likely to be threatened. The whole point of this line is that when you start having to pull back troops from Saint Armand or pull back troops from Ligny, you have a second line of defense and a really strong line of defense to pull your troops back behind and get them to safety. Because by giving up Ligny, you're giving up an objective. In case I haven't mentioned it, there are three objectives in this scenario: Saint Armand, Ligny, and there's an objective kind of back by the road here, von Thielmann's Corps. Yeah, those are the only three objectives throughout the game. They're hold objectives, and you hold on to them for most of the scenario. This von Thielmann, you hold on pretty much the entire time. He gets threatened, but he outnumbers the French to such a degree that it's not hard for him to hold this position. If you remember from episode 23, which was the French corps assault on Ligny, Gerard has three divisions. He has Pichot, Vichery, and then Hulot. Pichot and Vichery are detailed to attack Ligny, so all he has is Hulot's one division to try and make an attempt on von Thielmann's whole corps. So it's not hard for von Thielmann to hold this position. And consequently, this objective is worth less because of that, because it's not likely you're going to lose it. So these are the two real money objectives, and you're going to hold them for a long time. but you have to always be ready to give them up. As I said, when the French commit a lot of their forces, when you see the cavalry starting to come through and outflank Ligny, when you see them starting to come through here, it's just safer to give up the town. You should have close to enough points or enough points by the time that happens anyway, um, to just say, okay, time to give up the town. That's why we set up the second line of defense right here. It's going to be just a deadly fortress of just nothing but squares and guns and cavalry squadrons, squares and guns and cavalry squadrons, all linked together, and it's impenetrable. Um, and its main purpose is to give your troops that you're withdrawing from the towns a nice safe spot to retire behind, and that's what we're basically going to use purchase corps for. Um, at some point, as I said, the French will get Duret's division of Durland's corps. They'll come from somewhere over here and try and attack you in the flank. Just be ready for it. It's a small division. It's not that hard to defend against. They also have some cavalry, but it's not that hard to actually use the terrain and some of the rivers to separate the cavalry from the infantry and be able to fight the infantry on even terms while you're holding the cavalry at bay with squares. So long as you know where they're going to appear from and you know how you can use the terrain to actually separate those forces. Um, okay, I'm trying to think of anything else. That is basically the gist of it. As far as the actual micro tactical situations of how to defend these individual positions, Ligny I've already covered. Just give up the first part of the town back and set up back behind the river. You'll see how I do it. It's not hard to do. And set yourself up with a skirmisher line to screen your main forces and your artillery battery here. But keep the castle. The castle, you will eventually lose the castle. That's unavoidable, but it holds up Gerard's corps for a good amount of time. So it's certainly worth occupying, and it doesn't get battered that badly by Gerard's artillery out here. Saint Armand is largely, I don't really need to go into the specifics of it because it's largely the same as what happens in the Saint Armand Corps scenario that we already covered. You're going to use a lot of skirmishers, a lot of delaying tactics. You're going to send your skirmishers out far in front of the lines as the individual divisions approach to turn their artillery around, and then to delay their advance as they try to approach Saint Armand. And you're just going to do the same thing with every division as they try to approach this area. You're going to send skirmishers out to turn their guns around, stall them, and you know, make them pay for every foot of grass as they try to advance. And because none of our troops are locked like they are in the Prussian Corps scenario, they're all available. There is no reason at all that you won't have, you know, super strong defenses set up by the time any of these divisions get here, because you know they're coming, you know where to set up, and you don't have to wait for your troops to be released to do it. So in many ways, this is easier over here than it is during the Prussian Corps scenario, Saint Armand, simply because you don't have to deal with these some of these units being locked and being released to you. So yeah, this pretty much, you know, over here it ends up being pretty much like Saint Armand for the first couple of hours. After that, things can get different depending on what the French do, where they send their cavalry, where they send the Imperial Guard, whether they go to Ligny, whether they go to Saint Armand, you know, and that's different just in every playthrough. You know, I can show you what happened in this particular playthrough, but be ready for anything to happen along this front here. You know, the Sixth Corps comes. Lobau's Corps is a reinforcement. Sometimes they commit them, sometimes they don't. But usually they always commit their cavalry and they always commit the Imperial Guard, but they don't always commit them to one particular area. Sometimes they commit them all towards Ligny. Sometimes they commit them all towards Saint Armand. Sometimes they split them up. I've seen, you know, the old guard go to Ligny, and I've seen the middle and the young guard go to Saint Armand. You know, so any variation of that can happen, and just be ready for it to happen. And as long as you set this secondary line of defense up, if stuff starts getting hard, and you feel like you can't hold it anymore, don't try to. You're actually better off withdrawing in good order and not losing a lot of casualties and actually giving up the objectives earlier and inviting the French to try and assail this this ring of fortresses that you're going to set up uh, back here earlier than trying to hold this for as long as possible, withdrawing in bad order, losing a lot of casualties, and it's too late in the game for the French to really make a serious assault on the ring of fortresses, and so you don't get the casualties out of that you could have if you had withdrawn in good order earlier and actually given the French time to organize an assault on the ring of fortresses. Um, because that will get you a lot of points. Because obviously, as I said, the fortress is impenetrable. It will wreck anything that tries to approach it. Um, and if you give the French a decent amount of time to actually make an attack, they will take an incredible amount of losses, which will more than make up for the fact that you don't have the objectives. Um, so this is not a hold at all cost situation down here. This is a hold until it's getting really, really tough to hold. At that point, you are actually better off withdrawing behind the secondary line that you're going to set up, giving the enemy those positions early enough so that they have time to reorganize and then make an assault on the ring of fortresses, because those are all new troops that they're going to be fighting against. Those are going to be purchased troops that we're going to set up, and we're going to pull these troops back behind those lines so they're safe. And when they try and attack these fortresses, they will you'll get a lot of casualties and a lot of points. So, like I said, not a hold at all cost situation here. Hold until you know it's no longer tenable. And if you've been playing the series for a long time now that you've arrived at the army scenarios, you should have the judgment to know at this point when uh, a position becomes untenable. When you see a whole bunch of cavalry starting to march around your flank, that's not the time to say we're going to hold to the last. You're outflanked. Withdraw. That's the simple answer. When your troops are exhausted here, and you're down to a few battalions and some skirmishers, and you see the whole of the Imperial Guard and cavalry coming towards you, withdraw. That's it. Time to leave, and fall back behind the secondary defense that we're going to set up. Remember, it's all about points. It's not about and however it is you can get them. Now, even though these are the objectives, if you can't hold them, and you can't hold them, there's no reason to stand there and try and get as many points out of the objective as you possibly can, all the while getting outflanked, shot to pieces, and you're gonna get wrecked. Uh, the objectives are worth 100 points or so every 10 minutes or so. They're worth points, but they're not worth enough points to let your men get slaughtered uh, for the sake of holding them. Withdraw. It's better to withdraw and get safe behind this just devastating position that we're going to set up, and with enough time and enough hours left in the game for the French to actually try and assault that position. If you're able to hold these positions until the last half hour or the last hour of the game, um, you know, and then fall back, you're not going to get much out of the French because they're not really going to have enough time to move forward, occupy the towns, move through the towns, reorient themselves, reorganize themselves, and then make any kind of serious attack on this secondary position. So you don't have to. This is one of those instances where you can kind of withdraw at the first sign of trouble. Um, and if the situation gets out of hand, I do advise doing that. Now, Saint Armand, in my playthrough, I kind of was able to hold it, take it back, hold it. Kind of went back and forth at the end. Ligny, I gave up. I knew when I was outflanked at Ligny, and I withdrew. Um, but again, I had this secondary line set up right behind, kind of in an arc from Brye to kind of where Purchase Corps starts off, with the main part of it kind of right behind Ligny. So it's a nice safe spot to withdraw to. And yeah, other than that, you're really just going to be using the map, not the command map, the mini map, because this is a huge area. So you're going to see me Anytime I want to bounce between Saint Armand La Haye, Ligny, and this area over here. I'm always going to bring up the mini map and just click. It's too big an area to scroll your camera across. It's going to take too long. Even though we have the camera speed at maximum, it's just there's a massive, massive area. So get used to opening your mini map and actually clicking your camera to move it to different locations. And you're going to be doing a lot of that. One of the secrets is to set up your defenses in such a way that you know they can always hold for a couple of minutes at a time uh, without you being there. So that you can keep bouncing back and forth to these areas and keeping that situation kind of status quo. Um, every couple of minutes. So you go to Saint Armand, you make sure everything's okay, you position units however you think you're going to need them for the next few minutes, and you bounce up to Saint Armand La Haye, you do the same thing. Orient your units, make sure you see what's coming, make sure you have your defenses set up good. Okay, good. Bounce to Ligny. Everything's good at Ligny. Okay, Gerard's still sitting outside. Blah blah blah. My forces are still safe behind the river. Good. Bounce to Von Thielman over here. Okay, I've got my fortress set up on the road. I've got cavalry on the left. I've got some units on the right. Okay, good. And you just keep bouncing back in a sequence like that and keeping an eye on your forces. Because I'm a big hands on player, meaning I don't trust the AI to think for itself a lot. I tend, at this point in the game's life and with the knowledge I have of the game, I'm much more confident in my ability to decide what units should be doing than I am in the AI's ability. That doesn't mean I never use the AI, but I only use the AI when I want them to do something that I'm not looking for precision on, and I'm just not looking to control myself. Later on in the battle, you'll see me launch a 2 division uh, cavalry assault to counter Pajol's cavalry trying to cross the right flank of Ligny. I don't handle that. I just put the division commanders and all their commanders on all-out attack, and I just give them an objective on the command map down here, and I let them handle that. Because I'm really just looking to stop the French cavalry, and it's not like I'm looking to do something very precise. So I'll let the AI handle stuff like that. But generally speaking, I'm a hands-on player, and I take charge of most of my units. Now, you're probably thinking, Rob, you're going to take charge of an 80,000 man army. That's a lot to watch. Yes, it is. Um, and that's why I say it's best to think of this as 4 separate mini battles going on at once. One at Saint Armand, La Haye, one at Saint Armand, one at Ligny, and one over here with Von Thielman. I don't think of it as necessarily one big battle so much as 4 little battles going on at once. And I bounce back and forth them every couple of minutes. Uh, to make sure my the situation is still good. I'll shift units if I have to. Um, and then I'll just keep bouncing back and forth. So I don't have the entire army on take charge, just the units I'm using. And as I bring units into the battle, I'll take charge of them. But I won't lie, it's still a lot to keep an eye on, and I have a lot of practice doing it, much more practice than probably any of you do. So, um, and that's just from a long time of playing this game, that you will get more and more comfortable having large numbers of units on take charge and still feel like you are comfortable um, in being able to control them and keep an eye on them. Because remember, when units are on take charge, um, they don't really think for themselves. You have to think for them, which is why you have to keep kind of bouncing back and forth between uh, these various different locations. Saint Armand La Haye, Saint Armand Ligny, and the Tongrenelle area here by Von Thielman. Now, a lot of these situations will remain stable for hours before you even really have to start doing anything. Um, and a lot of times they're not all going at once. Chances are if the fight's going on heavily around Saint Armand, then it's probably the situation is pretty stable around Ligny or pretty stable around Tongrenelle or pretty stable around Wagnally. Usually the battle kind of unravels in a series of hot spots where the battle will flare up in intensity in a certain area and then sort of die down and flare up again anew in a new area. And you kind of just are bouncing back and forth between hotspots. When things settle down at Saint Armand, they might pick up at Ligny. When things settle down at Ligny, they might pick up over here. When they settle down here, they might pick up over here. And so you're largely just bouncing back and forth between hotspots on the battlefield. very rarely is the situation where the battle is just raging all across the line. It doesn't really unfold like that. It unfolds in more like a series of chapters, and sometimes the chapters go back and forth. You'll start off at Saint Armand La Haye, and then the battle will flare up around here, and then around here you'll go back to Saint Armand. It'll flare up again. So very rarely is it going to be that you're dealing with maybe more than one or two of these in terms of intensity of battle happening at once, while the other areas will be relatively stable. And it's just important to bounce back and forth to these key areas uh, and keep an eye on things. During all this time where you're keeping an eye on things, there's going to be lots of times where really it's pretty stable all along the line. And when you have these relatively quiet moments, that's when you want to be grabbing units from Purchase Corps and setting up a fortress, a ring of fortresses from Brye in a semicircle north of Ligny, kind of, and terminating kind of around here. Um, and you don't have to set this up all at once. Believe me, you have plenty of time, hours and hours you have to do this. So whenever you get a couple of minutes, just grab some units and start adding them to the line, and start by taking some of your guns and positioning them where you want them, and then start filling in the squares and the hort cavalry squadrons, and just sort of slowly developing it over time. Like I said, you have hours and hours to set this fortress up before it's ever going to need to be ready. So you can take your time. Just anytime you got a few minutes where the action is not too serious, you can go over and start grabbing more of Purchase units and start setting the secondary line of defense up. So I think that pretty much covers the general strategy. And I know that's a big one, guys, but this is a monster battle. This is huge. And these are my favorite types of scenarios to play in the game. This is why I got into this game, because of being able to fight these huge battles at the squadron level, at the battery level, at the battalion level. There's really no other game out there that does this, and it's what separates this game from everything else, and what I think makes it so extraordinary. Alrighty, so let's take a look further down here. All right, so our forces are the entire Prussian army, commanded by Blücher. We have the 1st Army Corps under von Zeithans. As I said, they are the front line. We have the 2nd Army Corps under von Perch. As I said, they are the reserve. And we have the 3rd Army Corps under von Thielmann. And as I said, they are securing our left flank. We need 19,000 points for a major victory. So pretty high score. And we're definitely going to need to inflict a lot of casualties and hold those objectives for a long period of time. But believe me, this is more than doable. All right, guys. So I believe we are finally ready to get into the scenario here. So let's launch this. Pop the old Scourge of War beverage. There it is. Alrighty. So I know that was a long strategy session, guys, but at least now you pretty much know what's going to happen and kind of when it's going to happen. And the vital areas that you're going to be defending. All right, so here we have Blücher. And here comes his courier. All right, and you can see it seems, Herr Marshal, the French army seems ready to advance against our lines. Our line is strong, and many buildings and towns create strong points for our troops. We have to hold the line of River Ligne until the British army will join us. The 1st Army Corps is in first line on the right center, with the 2nd in reserve and the 3rd protecting the left. We still have no news of current location of the 4th Corps, and that is from Velgluck, our Chief of Staff. And yes, all of our officers are on take charge from AI. And that's very necessary in a battle of this size, because without it, who knows what the heck they decide to do on their own. It would be really hard to get an army this size and spread out this much under control if all our officers were under take charge and they just decided to start doing whatever it is they felt like doing. So it's actually very good that our officers all start out on take charge. Alrighty, so we'll close this courier message in a second, and then we will head over and start setting up our defense of Saint-Armand, because Saint-Armand is the first point that gets attacked, just like in the Prussian Corps scenario. So as I said, I'm going to use this mini-map a lot to just get to positions that I need to get to. So here we are at Saint-Armand. Now, the setup is a little different. If you remember at the beginning of the Prussian Corps scenario, this unit that we're moving now was actually already inside the church. So we're going to move them up towards the church. We're going to set them up on the flank. We're going to take our, just like we did in the Corps scenario, we're going to take our little small, all our little small Jaeger battalions. We're going to put them in the church because they make great church defenders. And the bigger battalions we're going to keep back behind the big buildings here in Saint-Armand to protect them. And once they get into position, we're going to split off skirmishers and send them out, just like we did at the beginning of the Prussian Corps scenario, to turn the artillery of Lafol's division around to stop his troops much further back and force them to deploy and go online. Here I'm just moving these little units into the little farmhouse, just like I did in the Prussian Corps scenario. Pretty much this is just all routine at first, just kind of the same thing I do every time. Alright, so our line unit is arriving where I want them to be, kind of right on the flank of the church to protect that, and we're immediately going to start kicking off our skirmisher units because they got to get out there fast. And wait for them to start moving on their own, to take charge of them, of course. There they go, and I'm just going to plop them right on the road and have them run there. Yeah, it'll sap their fatigue, but I'm more concerned with covering a lot of distance and getting them out as far as I can to turn the guns around before they have a chance to set up. The key to turning the guns around is, of course, doing it while they're limbered. If you try to approach guns once they've unlimbered, they're just going to shoot you. So you have to get them while they're unlimbered. While they're limbered and moving. So you can see some of them starting to appear in our line of sight as we move forward. Now, we've lost the objective temporarily because I'm moving units out of range of it. That's okay. I'd rather get the defense set up right first, then we'll worry about getting the objective occupied. One thing you gotta understand with these army scenarios, you don't have to win them in the first hour. You have plenty of time. You know, I haven't seen too many people on YouTube attempt army scenarios, but those that I have usually suffer from the same problem. They all try to win the battle in the first hour. And, you know, I saw one guy play this battle of Ligny, actually, as the French. And within the first 2 hours of the battle, he actually had every French unit, including the Imperial Guard, committed to the battle. Every single unit he had sent at the Prussians within the first 2 hours of the battle. And sure, he ran off the Prussian first line very quickly, but he had his whole force committed, trying to win the battle in the first 2 hours. So he ran off the first line of the Prussian defense, and after 2 hours he declared victory and ended the battle. That's a lot like playing chess with a pigeon, isn't it? You know, they knock the pieces around off the board, crap on the board, and then fly back to their flock to declare victory. You know, the scenario is 7 hours long, so you got to play it for 7 hours. All right, so here comes Lafol's division. And they're not interested in shooting it out with us, I guess, right here. No, they apparently feel like we are way too far forward and we need to be gotten out of there. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to withdraw. And now some of their units they see that there's more skirmisher units out here. We have some units back here, some more units back here. So now they're going to stop to deploy. We're gonna engage them. We're in a good spot here. We're behind hedgerows. We got a lot of skirmisher units set up. We're certainly going to be able to hold them back for quite a while. You can see all the guns have withdrawn back, far back behind their lines. That's exactly what we want. We don't want their artillery to be able to come to bear on us at all, because if they can get their artillery relatively close, they'll start putting a wallop on us. You know, so exactly what we want to do there is get the artillery turned around and forced to deploy back where they'll do the French no good at all. And this little kind of little Jaeger brigade that is set up right behind Saint Armand, they're great. These two little units right here, these are great troops to use for the church. So I'm going to grab kind of anything that's really small and just stock them up behind the church as reserve units. So every time one unit in the church, you know, either gets shot to pieces or exhausted and runs out, we have another unit to feed right back into the church. And you'll see I'm speeding up my deployment here in terms of what we did in the Prussian Corps scenario, and bringing some of the units that were released to us later on in that scenario. I'm just bringing them forward to set up right away. I'm not committing them to the battle, but I'm setting them up in the positions where I already know. And after playing the Prussian Corps scenario, you guys should already know, you know, where they'll be needed most. All right, so here we are at Ligny. While our skirmishers are, this is what I meant when I said in terms of bouncing around from position to position. My skirmishers are engaged against the French, and for at least a couple of minutes, I'm pretty sure that they're going to be okay, you know. And I'll be back at Saint Armand before anything serious happens. In the meanwhile, what I'm doing is any unit here that is on the southern side of the river here, and we're looking from north to south right now, I'm going to pull them back behind the river, because all this artillery back here, as I said, over time will start to cause a lot of damage. So all these units that are on this side of the river here, I'm going to pull them back and set up a line of battalions behind the river, blocking the bridges, with skirmishers set up on the southern side of the river. Skirmishers, of course, do not get hit hard by artillery at all. But line units and you know, big units like this can be. So it's important to get them back as far as possible out of view of the guns. And that's all I'm doing right here, is anything on this side of the river is just coming back on the southern side of the river. With the exception of the castle. The castle I will leave occupied, because they do a great job of stopping up Gerard's initial attack, because they basically act like a breakwater, and they force any French unit that comes near it to stop and engage them. So them I'm going to keep occupied. So we're bringing all our units back across the river, and bring the officers back across the river later on. They're good out there right now. And the unit in the little farmhouse here, these guys too. I'm not sure if I get them out right now. I think I do, but you absolutely want to get these guys out of here, because believe me, they're going to get pounded on by the guns. This little farmhouse that they're in is not going to stop them from getting hurt by the artillery. There's no reason to hold that little farmhouse. It's not a key position. And in fact, it's a much more defensible position being set up in line back here behind the creek, behind the river, than it is to try and occupy these buildings and so forth. You're just going to get shot up by the artillery, and it makes for messy fighting. All right, so here we are back at Saint Armand, and yeah, pretty much exactly what I thought. The skirmishers are still holding well. My units are moving into position. And the French have stopped and deployed, and they're engaging our skirmishers. Pretty much exactly what I wanted to happen is happening. So I can see one unit out there starting to move around my right. They're not moving forward, but they're definitely on my right flank. So I'm going to kick off another skirmisher unit and send them out here to extend my right and have a force ready to engage these guys if they start moving forward. It looks like they may be getting ready to do. And I have my units in the hedgerows because obviously I get a defensive terrain bonus for that, which helps their morale and their combat ability. So this battle started at 2:30 p.m., 14:30 military time. So I'm going to stop it at 3:30, 15:30 military time. So we have just the first hour, and then after that, there's 6 hours left of the battle, and I'll do them in 2-hour increments because I know this video I had to spend a lot of time, obviously, going over the strategy. So I didn't want to include a 2-hour, an almost hour-long strategy session and then a 2-hour video. That would have been a long video. So instead, we're going to do we did the strategy session. We'll do the first hour of the battle here and how things open up, and then the rest of the videos will be in 2-hour increments of the battle, and that'll be a 4-part series. I think that's pretty manageable. It's 2-hour videos are long, but they're not super long, and it also makes it so that the playlist of this scenario isn't just super long, and you have a 7-part series just for this one scenario. So it's kind of a balance of trying to cover a lot of the battle in one shot per video, as well as not making it so long that it's like a test of endurance to watch. And after talking to people, I thought that was kind of the best balance. All right, so now we've got our skirmisher units engaged, and they're holding back Lafol's division, bringing up some regiments to set up our defense along the road, just like we did in the Prussian Corps scenario. And this must be a skirmisher unit that got pushed back or forced to retreat while we were over in Ligny. That's okay. That kind of thing is going to happen. You can't watch everything all the time, 100% of the time. The best thing you can do is set up your defense in the best way possible so that anything that does happen while you're not looking is not critical. One skirmisher unit being forced to retreat is not critical. When I come back, I can simply split off another one and, bring them back later if need be. Clearly, this skirmisher unit was charged. That's why they have no casualties, but they are missing points. They lost some points for retreating. So clearly they were forced back. So here we are back at Ligny now. We're going to turn all our units into line formation. The rest of our units are kind of finishing up, getting set up here. So you can see by doing this, I have set up a big field of fire for my infantry units, as the French units, that if they come through the town, they're going to emerge from that first row of buildings, disorganized, but facing a very organized Prussian force with lines kind of, shoulder to shoulder all along the southern part of the river here, with skirmishers deployed on the southern side of the river. And I do need to get the leaders back here because I need to get the objective occupied so that we can start getting points for that. And here I'm going to start splitting off the skirmisher units and putting them on the southern side of the river here. Again, skirmishers do not take a beating from artillery the way line units or column by division units would. So it's no problem in splitting off skirmishers and having them be the first line of defense, so to speak. And, that's good. Anything to stop the French, delay them, and get them caught in messy situations where, they're not able to bring a lot of firepower to bear because they're disorganized trying to come through the town, and they're being engaged by our skirmishers. Skirmishers do great in town fighting. So this unit here, their flag is you kind of have to click on the house to get their flag. And we're going to pull them back. And they'll be one of our skirmisher units. And again, I'm basically blocking the approaches to to cross the river. Now this isn't obstructed terrain. Obviously, this is at Ligny. This is before that great thunderstorm on the 17th, so the river isn't flooded or swollen or anything, and you know, they can cross anywhere. But I'm basically blocking the entire part of the river here, so that the French have a hard time getting across it. And I've already taken 3 losses on that unit that was inside the farmhouse out there. Obviously, I want to get them out of there as quickly as possible. That is not a safe spot to be with all those French guns out there. So we have the objective occupied. You can see, here's our Prussian Allied colors. And even though everything is not done being set up at Ligny, I'm going to quickly pop back here and see what's going on Saint Armand. Now, my troops at Ligny are still moving. They're still getting into position, so I don't need to be there for that. You know, I'll come back in a few minutes and make sure everything looks the way I want it to look. And now I'm just going to pop back here to Saint Armand and make sure everything is still kosher over here. So far, we're doing great. Our skirmishers are kicking butt. We're dropping French like mad. We're in our nice defensive hedgerows over here. Now, I realize hedgerows don't seem like much of a defense, but or much of a bonus to defensive terrain. But as I said in the Grad Toolbar Demystified series, this game handles defensive terrain rather abstractly. You either have it or you don't, and no one form of defensive terrain is really any better than any other form of defensive terrain. Being in a bunch of hedges is no different in terms of the game's mechanics than being in a sunken road behind a stone wall. It's still the same defensive terrain bonus, you know. So whether it's these little hedgerows or, you know, the stone wall in front of Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg, it would still be the same defensive terrain bonus as far as the game is concerned. And you're basically seeing a sped up version here of everything I did in the Prussian Corps scenario. I'm still moving the units to the same positions. I'm just doing it quicker to get it out of the way and to set it up ahead of time, because I don't have to wait for these units to be released, because we already have command of the entire army. So I can afford to bring these units and set them up the way I do in the Prussian Corps scenario. I'm just able to do it faster, so that I can already have my defenses set up, and it leaves me more time to bounce around to other locations. So you can see this this regiment back here. I'll probably bring them up and set them right up on the right of the road to where I set up the other regiment, just to get everything going. I mean, it's the same setup I used in the Corps scenario. I'm just doing it quicker. So here we are. We're bringing von Loren's regiment up. We'll deploy him on this side of the road to link him up with the troops in that little farmhouse by Saint Armand La Haye. As always, gotta find a place for the officer. Just keep clicking until you find a spot. Then you can adjust spacing. Sometimes this game is it's a little silly when it comes to getting your units to deploy the way you want them to. You know, you just gotta keep messing. There we go. Let's try that. Adjust spacing. Set the formation. It's still not the way I want it, but you know what? It's close enough, and we can finesse it unit by unit if we have to once they get into position. So again, we got our guns over here with some cavalry, and we're actually going to bring that all over to Saint Armand La Haye. We use this battery to set up the fortress in the Prussian Corps scenario, Saint Armand, and we're going to do the same thing here. And we'll set these guns up right along the road, and we'll have them use road movement. But here we have a cavalry regiment, and we didn't have that in the Corps scenario, so we're going to bring them over too. And again, anytime you see me bring up the map, I'm just basically using it to zip to locations on the battlefield, because it's too big a field to go scrolling around with your camera. And everything is still holding well here. We have the objective at Saint-Armand. Our troops are moving into position. I'm going to advance this battery pretty much exactly where I put them, just like in the core scenario. Kind of right behind up on the hill here. Good spot for them. Get them a little higher up on the hill. And they're not needed yet. I'm just doing all this because I have the time to do it right now before things get too hairy. And I'm going to take this little skirmisher unit of, well, it's actually a little battalion. I'm going to put them in skirmish formation and just send them out there in the hedgerows. Just be ready to turn the guns around when that infantry division comes forward. So we're bringing our guns up in anticipation of, you know, obviously the skirmisher line will not hold forever. They're doing good right now, but you know, when these divisions start moving forward, their position is going to get outflanked, and we'll have to pull them back, even if they're still holding. So I'm just preparing for later in the battle when the battle will move more towards Saint-Armand. So we'll see how our things at Ligny are working out here. So I've still got one unit on this side of the river, but you know what? They're probably okay because this is a big compound of buildings over here, and they're behind it. So the artillery probably does not have a great shot to them. And I'm just you know, kind of fine-tuning and finessing the position a little bit. And I'm going to split off skirmishers and just cover the whole kind of south bank of the river here on this road here. And this is a little 50-man battalion that is not a skirmisher unit, but I'll just set them up in skirmish formation here and set them up across the side of the road here. As you can see, I'm taking command of every one of these units. I'm controlling them. They're deployed where I want them to be. They're on the opposite bank of the river, you know, ready to shoot at anything that comes near them. So I don't want them moving off and doing their own thing. I'll do the thinking here, guys. You just do what I tell you. I have the whole plan in my head here. So yeah, I will tend to take command of all the units that I have in you know, in a combat area, and you know, deploy them exactly the way I want them deployed, and I'll make the decisions as far as where you guys are going to go and what you guys are going to do. You know, like I said, I've been playing this game for a very long time. Handling armies this size is nothing new to me at this point. All right, so here it comes. They're coming quicker this time. You can see the artillery moving out. We're going to send this skirmisher unit out to turn them right around because we don't want them coming anywhere near us. As I've said many times, artillery is probably the most devastating arm in the game, especially if you can get it at very close range. So the very last thing we want to happen is for the French to be able to bring all these guns forward and get them near our position and start bombing away on us. Because that'll do a lot of damage. One thing I can say for the Army of the North is it fielded a lot more artillery and a lot more cavalry than any of Napoleon's armies in the few previous years before it, certainly during the 1813 and 1814 campaigns had. He had a, because of all the guns and horses lost in Russia, he had he didn't have a lot of artillery and cavalry for those campaigns. But the Army of the North had a lot of artillery and a lot of cavalry. So we don't want to let them be able to bring this artillery to bear on us. It will start to really pound down on our units if we let them. So, as I stated in the Prussian Corps scenario, Saint Armand, it is very, very important when the French divisions start approaching to turn their guns around. Now, it's a lot easier to do at Saint Armand than it is to do at Ligny, which is why I have a different tactic at Ligny. At Ligny, we're basically moving back behind the first layer of the town as a defense against those guns, because we really can't. They're already deployed, and we really can't go out there and get them to move further back. And they're going to move even further forward, but they're not going to do it until the infantry moves forward. So there's really nothing we can do about the artillery at Ligny. We just have to stay away from it. But here at Saint Armand, no. They come forward with their artillery in the front, which it makes it so that we can send out skirmishers to turn them around. And it's very, very important to do that. You do not want to let the French bring their superior artillery to bear on us. And as always, we're going to bring supply wagons over because it's a 7-hour battle. Guns are going to run out of ammo. Even infantry units are going to run out of ammo. We're going to have to resupply skirmishers, resupply infantry line units. Supply wagons get quite a workout in this battle because it's just long. It's 7 hours long, and units are going to be fighting for hours. They're going to blow through all their ammo. So it's important to keep your supply wagons around. All right, so our skirmisher unit has turned the entire 2 gun batteries around. Love it. And you can see I'm just making sure these guys aren't moving yet. So Gerard's Corps is still sitting pretty behind their lines. They haven't made a move towards Ligny yet. And we have our area around Tongrenelle is not being threatened yet. I'm just going to move the Corps Commander von Thielmann by the objective, so that that just makes it easier to keep track of the points. It's to have the highest ranking officer occupying the objective. And like I said, the Tongrenelle area does not get threatened that much, and we have just a huge number of troops here, an entire corps basically. So Hulot's 1 division of French troops is not going to be much of a threat to us. That's just why this objective is not worth as much as the one at Ligny or the one at Saint Armand, but nevertheless, it's still points. I mean, look at it. There's a huge corps. Just troops everywhere. And I'm just kind of looking around and seeing what I got here. Seeing where everybody's deployed. And a lot of these troops we never even really use. You don't use every unit in the game, but I just making sure and seeing what I got. And like I said, I know this looks overwhelming in terms of the sheer number of troops that you command on the field, but you have 7 hours to do this. You do not have to set this up all in one shot. It may look like I'm setting things up clearly, or I'm setting things up quickly. But as I've played the scenario, a dozen times, a lot of what I'm doing here is just like standard stuff, like pre-thought, pre-planned. Like this is just the same stuff I do every time I play the scenario. These are just kind of like the standard opening moves, you know. You know how like chess has like opening sequences that you just, you know, kind of can use all the time, you know, depending on what your opponent does. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. These are just kind of the same opening moves I kind of always make in the battle. I always send a second unit into the castle like that. That's why I bring this regiment forward as a reserve. And I think at this point now, these troops are up. We're just going to, remember I said, you know what, we'll just bring them up as close as we can to where we want them, and then we'll just finesse it unit by unit. And that's what I'm going to do here. So we're still doing a good job of holding LaFoll's division at bay here. We're in our little defensive arc here in these hedgerows. And don't these hedgerows just look like they were placed here to form a good defensive arc? Almost like whoever grew them was like thinking, someday there's going to be a big battle here. And these hedgerows are going to do a great job of being a defensive terrain bonus for the troops that fight here. Sorry. Alrighty, so with the artillery turned around, we can bring that skirmisher unit back. There's no reason for them to stand out there and get shot at. And again, just like in the Prussian Corps scenario, I'm going to kick skirmisher units out kind of in front of the main battalions just to screen them. You know, there's some woods out here. They'll get a defensive terrain bonus for being in them. And you'll notice I always use 100-man skirmisher groups. I'm sure I probably talked about why I do this before, but just to go over it again. The reason I use 100-man skirmisher groups is because I think it's the best balance in terms of being enough men to make an effective skirmisher group, while not being too big that it really hurts the main parent unit that they split off from in terms of the strength of the unit itself. You're not separating too much strength from them. I feel like separating more than 100 men would be to separate too much of the main line unit strength from the main battalion. And I feel like using smaller organizations like a 50-man group, I just don't feel a 50-man skirmisher group would be effective for very long. It wouldn't take that long to whittle a skirmisher unit down to 30 or 20 men. And I don't really feel that that's an effective skirmisher group. So I feel like 100 men is the best size for a skirmisher group. And it's always worked out for me, so I've never had any reason to change the way I do it. Because I just feel it's the best balance. In terms of it's not weakening the main unit too much, and it's you know, enough to make viable skirmisher units, especially when you split off a bunch of them, you know. I don't just 100-man skirmisher group is nothing, but I don't use them like that. I use a whole bunch of them together, you know, to create a good skirmisher line. Now, in this instance, I split off a lot of those units from just one unit, but that's really the point of that unit, is just to split off skirmisher units, you know, and then sit back behind the castle, so to speak. And all I'm doing here is just bringing these infantry units that are out here just back behind the artillery. Just in case I need to split off skirmishers to screen those guns. The area between Ligny and Saint Armand is not really much of a hot spot. It isn't until much later in the battle that the French think about actually outflanking Ligny and moving through the space between Saint Armand and Ligny. And even when they try to do it, it's much closer to Ligny than it is to Saint Armand. So, you know, the kind of the open spaces between Saint Armand and Ligny are not something you really need to worry about defending until later in the battle. And at that point, when the French are getting ready to pierce that position anyway, that's not the time to say, okay, now I'm going to defend that position. That's the time to say, okay, Ligny is no longer tenable. Let's withdraw behind the secondary line that we're going to create. You know, so it's never really worth stacking up a lot of forces in that gap between Ligny and Saint Armand. So our cavalry is moving into position and our guns are moving into position. And I'm going to bring the same regiment over that we used in the Corps scenario, Saint Armand, and set up the same fortress, just like we did in Saint Armand. All of these regiments tend to have one small unit attached to them. I almost always will detach, and I'll send them to the church at Saint Armand, because as I said in the Prussian Corps scenario for Saint Armand, well, that's kind of the linchpin of the defense, is this church. So you can see I already have 2 units stacked up behind the church as the reserve for the church. But anytime I move a regiment into action, or, you know, into a position, and I see they have one of those smaller, you know, 100, 200 man battalions attached to them, I'll detach them and send them to the church, just so I have a lot of reserves for that church. Those little 100 to 200 man battalions, they're great for using for the church, and you know, not so useful for anything else, which is why I tend to do that. I tend to detach them from their regiments and make them just independent units and bring them over by the church, so that if units get run out of the church, I can just fill them up with a fresh unit. And here comes the next phase of the French attack. Looks like we got 2 brigades, one here, one here. They are once again trying to come forward with some artillery. I believe we still have our skirmisher unit out here forward, though. We may be able to turn some of those guns around, or at least keep them from approaching as closely as they would like to. It's a lot harder to turn the guns around when they're approaching with infantry. But if we can go out and engage the infantry, it would certainly force the guns to move further back as well. All right, now I'm going to grab this division right here. It's a pretty good sized division. We have some artillery and a little bit of cavalry. And we got about 7,500 men, and I'm going to bring them down to take up the Wagnally position. And basically what I'm bringing them down there for is to protect our right flank against Duret's division from Durland's Corps. I know that they approach from somewhere down here along with some cavalry. So I want this division of von Tippelskirch, Ludwig von Tippelskirch. I want to bring his division down to secure our right flank and be ready to meet that force. That doesn't happen till later on, but you know, just getting them down here while I can. And I'll set them back here with line artillery front, and you'll notice I have them right by the river here. And some of their units are going to deploy on one side of the river, and some of these other units are going to deploy on the other side of the river. And this is the river that we will basically try and use to split the enemy cavalry from the enemy infantry, so that we can attack the infantry on one side of the river while keeping the cavalry penned up on the other side of the river so that they can't help them. All right, so our skirmish unit, we didn't even do anything, but just by being where they are, we have forced the guns to turn around and forced these brigades to start to deploy. These guys will not hold for very long with an entire brigade, but nonetheless, we did turn the guns around, and we have these 2 brigades now that are stopping to deploy further back than they would like. They'd like to come up in here. But first, they have to get rid of this skirmisher unit, which won't be too hard. It's only 1 skirmisher unit. But just the act of forcing them to deploy and go online and start getting into the battle that far back is going to buy us some time. And as with any defense, buying yourself time is a good thing. Well, some of these skirmisher units are getting pretty tired. They're doing really good. Oh, some of them are out of ammo, too. I don't have an ammo wagon anywhere nearby, do I? Also, a little trick when it comes to skirmisher units running out of ammo, a quick way to refill them is just to recall them and kick out a fresh skirmisher unit instead, and that skirmisher unit will have ammo. So if a supply wagon isn't around and you need to get a skirmisher unit on the line with ammo, and they're close enough to their parent unit, which my units are not, but if they are, you could always just recall the skirmisher unit and then kick out a new one, and they'll have ammo. And I'm just doing the same thing. I'm sending skirmisher units way out in front of the line, so when the next division approaches this position, we'll turn their guns around and force the infantry to deploy in line and deal with us. Just to whittle down as much as we can before they ever even come near the fortress, which, of course, will take care of everything that's left over. And after doing that, after deploying those skirmisher units, I'm going to send the line unit over here, over to link up the little farmhouse with the extreme right of my line on the road there. And I have another regiment coming up that will actually take the place of the units that was there to set up the fortress. All right, so Gerard is now approaching Ligny. You can see Schaefer's brigade right here of Pachot's division is moving right towards the fort, right towards it. And now our units are pretty much safe and sound back behind the river here. We're okay. So we're just gonna let this castle here stop up Schaefer's brigade, and they're in pretty good shape, these units so far. They've only taken one casualty. Like I said, the castle is pretty substantial, and there's not a lot of artillery really targeting it, although they have one battery up now, but it looks like they just moved them there. So these units in here are still very fresh, and they haven't taken really any losses, and their job is to basically deal with Pachot's division here. I think this is Schaefer's brigade in the lead here, and this looks like maybe Rome's brigade backing them up from behind. So it looks like Pachot's entire division is making a move for this castle, which is good, because we'll be able to stop them up for a long, long time with just this castle. And we'll see what Rome's brigade does if he wants to move off and try and enter the town. He can move in and we'll have some of our skirmishers to meet them. And I'm just going to put this unit in line over by the river here, just in case Schaefer's units try to move around the left side of the flank of the castle. We have something to meet them. And that's why I have this regiment deployed back here in reserve, just in case I need some forces to protect my right flank, should Schaefer try and move around in the process of surrounding the fort. We might be able to send some skirmishers out and get some shots at him. Now, this is what I mean about the artillery at Ligny. It's really hard to actually go and send skirmishers out to turn them around because they come up with the infantry. And they don't come up too far, so it's like you'd really have to send your skirmishers out far to turn them around. I mean, maybe we could have, but more than likely our skirmishers would have just gotten charged by the infantry and run off. So, and it's not as critical. It's not as critical at Ligny as it is at Saint Armand, because they just don't bring them that close. And we've already withdrawn behind, kind of behind Ligny. So here comes the French at Saint Armand here. They have finally pushed that skirmisher unit back. I told you they would. But we have a big line of Prussian infantry and a whole bunch of skirmishers in front, ready to deal with these guys. Now, they may charge some of these skirmisher units and run them off. That's okay. We have our line units behind them to shoot them up as they're reforming, and if we can make them break and run, we will just bring the skirmishers back up to take their place. Now, here's what I'm talking about. Some of our units are starting to get outflanked here because these divisions are moving in from the west and outflanking this position. So we're not going to be able to hold that for much longer. You can see they're charging our skirmisher units. The skirmisher units are withdrawing. We've lost the objective now because the French have moved within distance to contest it. Sometimes that's unavoidable. You know. So our whole skirmisher line is pretty much getting run off, but all our line units are engaged in shooting at these units now. And these are big Prussian line units right here. So what do you think we're going to do with these guys? We can just turn them right around and be on this unit's flank. And some of our skirmisher units now that have withdrawn, we can just put them right back up in front of the line units to screen the line units. And you see this unit was being shot in the flank by this unit, and they're quickly running off. And okay, the French no longer have enough, because that unit ran off, the French no longer have enough men in range to contest the objective. So we've briefly got it back here. We may lose it again if this unit comes forward, because then they'll have enough men. But right now we've got it, because this one unit is not enough men to actually contest the objective. I think it's like 1,000 men that you need to have in range of this objective. Alright, so we've got this unit right here, ready to start shooting in the flank. This column is going to charge this skirmish unit and get them out of there. They really don't like that I screen my main lines with skirmisher units. So they will do what they can to charge them and get rid of them. But both of these units now are in position to get flanked by this skirmisher unit. And as I've said before, flanking fire is a good way to quickly drive off the enemy because it impacts their morale hard. So this first unit is already withdrawing. This unit is giving us their rear. And again, we've lost the objective. Like I said, it's touch and go here with this for until we can clear out the this initial wave of French attack here. Bring these guys up to secure our right and start shooting at this unit. This is all holding pretty good so far. In fact, we've driven off a lot of units. Let's see what's going on at Ligny. So I've got my unit that I've deployed on the extreme right here. We're going to send a skirmisher unit down, either down by the river or right across it. Looks like right across it. And I'm putting them there really just to see if I can get some flanking fire on some of these units that are moving around the church. You see they're attempting to surround it, which is the best way to shoot men out of the church. So, you know, I don't disagree with it at all, except that I would use, you know, maybe skirmisher units and not tie down Schaefer's entire brigade in doing so. And bounce back here to Saint Armand. And I'm bringing up another unit as a reserve here, just in case I need them in the town. I only have little small units in the town. And see if we can drive these guys off and recapture the objective. And another charge running off my skirmishers. But, you know, that's not as bad as it looks when your whole skirmisher line gets ran off. Keep in mind, every time units charge and run off a skirmisher unit, they're committing their entire battalion to the charge, and they're to run off a 100-man skirmisher group. They're going to have to stop and reform after they charge the skirmisher groups. And they've got these big line units shooting at them at point-blank range while they're doing so. You know, look at all these men dropping. You know, bayonet charges are that's just something that's going to happen. You know, the bayonet charge during Napoleonic warfare was still very effective. And it was a good way to drive enemy units off a position. Fortunately for us, you know, the AI tends to only deal in, you know, 1 battalion at a time charges. It's perfectly happy to waste its charges on skirmisher units, and all these things go a long way in helping us hold our position against bayonet charges. So this first wave is now being pushed back here. We're starting to bring our skirmisher units back up. And yeah, so the French wasted most of the impetus of that initial assault on charging skirmisher units, you know, and then our line units were able to drive them off. So they really didn't gain much from doing that because, well, we'll just bring as soon as we're done driving these units off, as you see they're running off here, you know, and forming up further back here, we'll just bring our skirmisher units back up and they'll have to do the same thing again. So I've got a nice 700-man battalion now that I've brought into the center of town to act as a reserve. I still can't get this objective. I know I have enough men within range of the objective, but clearly the French do too, and that's what's causing the objective to be contested. And I would like to drive them out of there. Alright, so we've really busted up a lot of Lefau's division here. Some of these units are now out of ammo and very, very tired. So, you know, as more French units move in from the west of Saint-Armand, though, that line will become more and more untenable. All right, so finally that French unit is broken. We've now got the objective back. It's 10 minutes for, I think, 100 points. So like I said, the objectives in this game, they're not worth a whole heck of a lot. The only reason you want to hold on to them is because even not being worth a whole heck of a lot, we're talking about holding on to objectives for, you know, hours and hours and hours, you know, 7 hours. So over time, they can be worth a lot. And there's 3 of them. Obviously, this is the one at Ligny, which is also the same, I believe, and the one at Tongrenel, which I think is the same duration. It might be 5 minutes and not 10. I'm not sure. We'll have to look at that. But I think it's 50 points instead of 100 points. Alright, so the French are starting to regroup and come at us again. We still don't have all our skirmishers in position yet. We should start grabbing them and getting them back up here. But our line units are doing fine so far. Again, the line units are getting to shoot at a lot of these French battalions after they've charged, while they're reforming, and so it's, you know, they really get to shoot them up kind of before the French really have a chance to set up and do much damage to them. And well, this would explain why a lot of Lefau's division has retreated. This gun battery is now in good range to actually fire over here, and I'm sure that contributed to making a lot of these guys run off. However, we still got a lot of French troops in this arc right here. Certainly we're in danger of being outflanked over here, but right now it's only 1 battalion, and we're holding them up with some skirmisher units. But damn, these skirmisher units are really starting to get tired. You can see their morale is taking a hit. They're exhausted. You know, they don't have much ammo left. 20 rounds. Yeah, some of them are okay. You know, but as I said, in 7-hour scenarios like this, you know, some of your units will start running out of ammo, so you got to keep an eye on that. You can see What did I say? What did I say his name was? Tipplespurk, or whatever his name is. His division is moving into position, 7,500 men on our right flank, and as I said there, to basically defend against Duret's division of Durland's corps. And we're going to start getting the fortress set up here. We got the cannons in position, who are all shooting down to the left there because there's nothing worth shooting at in front of them right now. But regardless of what they're shooting at, their main job is going to be to fend off the division that I believe it's Gerard's division of Van Dam's corps that's going to attack this position. So we're going to set up the usual fortress. We're going to have line infantry on the right, line infantry on the left, unit in reserve to deploy skirmishers, and we're going to have the whole front of the line covered with skirmishers. So, deadly setup. Alright, so all our skirmisher units are back up now. That's good. See? No problem. They get run off, you just bring them right back up. No big deal. You know, and they did the job of getting the French to charge them instead of the French charging our line units. Which, who knows what would have happened then. The Prussian units are bigger, but undoubtedly the French infantry is of higher troop quality. So we would rather have the French infantry waste their charges on the skirmishers than have them charge the line units and possibly crack a hole open in our line. So you can see we're setting up a nice long line all the way from Saint-Armand, all the way up through Saint-Armand-la-Hameau, through Saint-Armand-la-Haye, and eventually into Wagnerly with Tipplespurch's division. And we have most of our cavalry set up on the right because I know most of the French cavalry is on their far left in that Wagnerly area. So that's where we want our cavalry as well. So this is Lagarde's brigade, was obviously the vanguard of the French assault there, and they have been pushed back soundly. And meanwhile, the fighting at Ligny is still going on, and I'm not watching it at all. I'm not watching it at all because I'm confident that Schaefer's brigade is still just shooting it out with the men I have in the castle, and anything that moves into town is going to first have to tangle with my skirmishers on the south side of the river. So even though I'm not watching Ligny right now, I am pretty much confident that my setup is a good one, and that it'll hold without me hawking it every second. So what I'm beginning to do now is pull back my secondary line of artillery here, and I'm going to begin setting up that second line of defense that I was telling you guys about in the strategy discussion, where we talked about setting up an arc of fortresses kind of from Brye and in a semicircle. I'm not going to set it up all at once. I'm just starting to move some of the guns into position where I know I'm going to want them, and, you know, just little by little, I'll put it together. I know I have hours to do this, you know, so I'll do a little bit here, a little bit there, nothing big. And that is von Retzel, the commander of the all of the First Corps artillery. So being that it's mostly his artillery that I'm bringing back, I'm going to send him back there too, to kind of be the senior officer in that position. So now we will take a look at what's going on at Ligny, and you'll notice, oh, it looks like Pichot's entire division is stopped up there. And we'll quickly see how some of our skirmishers are doing. But overall, well, our men are not getting the best of it. They're definitely losing men. That could be just artillery. Maybe maybe Pachot's division is just now actually engaging the fort. So let's see what happens here. It looks like they've only got about 1 unit or 2 units engaging the fort right now. These are the only 2 units that I can see right here and right here actually engaging the fort. So it's very unlikely that they inflicted 50 casualties on our units. That's probably all artillery damage before these units actually engaged. There's nothing we can do about that. You know, the fort is doing a good job. The castle here is doing a good job of stopping up this entire group of Pachot's division here. So even if they're not getting the best of it, I still want to leave them there, you know, because they're just delaying the enemy from actually getting into Ligny. So here we are back at Saint Armand, and as I said, I do a lot of jumping around with the map, so just, you know, in order to not disorient you guys when I jump to a new location, I'll mention where we are. You know, so you guys know that I'm bouncing from location to location and so forth. So we're starting to pull back some of these skirmisher units. Some of them are out of ammo. Some of them are taking a big morale hit. This position is not going to hold for much longer. But, hey, it held for a really long time and did a great job of stopping up LaFoll's division. So I'm not at all disappointed in their performance. They did a great job. But, hey, troops can only fight for so long. When you run out of ammo, when you know, when your morale takes a hit, when you're exhausted, what are you going to do, you know? So we're coming down to the end of the first hour here, and I'll stop it at 15:30. And you can see we have the, we've covered the kind of the opening engagement at Saint Armand and at Ligny. Nothing really serious has happened yet, just, the, you know, the feeling out process, so to speak. And there we go, 15:30. And we'll start off right here again when I start off with part 2, and then we'll do the next 2 hours of the battle. So yeah, that was pretty much the kind of the opening hour of the battle there. You'll see that we got our defenses at Saint Armand out real quick. We set up our defenses between Saint Armand and Saint Armand-La-Haye pretty much exactly like we did in the Prussian Corps scenario. Pretty much the same idea. Things may have happened a little bit quicker in terms of how fast we got things set up, only because units were released to us right away in this scenario that are locked in the Prussian Corps scenario. But other than that, same basic idea. And in Ligny, all we did was pull our forces all back behind the northern bank of the River Ligne and set up skirmisher units on the southern bank. And beyond that, nothing really happened at Ligny other than, you know, Pachot's division has approached. They've engaged the fort, the castle, and the kind of the opening skirmish at Ligny has begun. And that pretty much covers it for the opening of the Battle of Ligny here from the Prussian perspective. And next episode, we'll be back with the next 2 hours of the battle. I only covered 1 hour here because I know I spent a lot of time at the beginning talking about the strategy and the tactics and what we're going to do. So there won't be any of that in the next, you know, the rest of the video, since I already covered it in this video. So the rest of the videos will all cover 2 hours of the battle. So that's how I figured I would balance everything out, and we'll make it a 4-part series, and, you know, each episode will roughly be 2 hours long. So all right, yeah, that's pretty much it for part 1, guys. You know, study it, study the initial setup. Make sure you use your skirmishers to turn all the guns around. Make sure you pull your forces back out of that kind of first line of buildings in Ligny and set your men up on the north bank of the River Ligne to keep them protected from the French artillery. And, you know, slowly start setting your, you know, if you get a minute or two, grab some of your second line guns and just start setting them up in that arc between Brye and Ligny. as you start setting up your secondary line. Nothing's really going to happen at Tongrenel for a little while, so just make sure you have the objective occupied there, and just you can sit there for now. We'll cover what we're going to do when Hulot's division of Girard's Corps starts moving up that road towards Tongrenel. That's not hard to deal with at all. All right, guys, that's it, and I will see you for part 2 next time.